Hey, welcome back. So in addition to rank X, there's another DAX function that can apply ranking logic to your Power Pivot tables, albeit in a slightly different way, the TOPN function. So TOPN works kind of like rank X, but instead of ranking items displayed in the pivot table, it clips off the top N, where N could be 5 or 10 or whatever number you choose, records from a table based on a ranking, and then returns this subset of records. The ranking piece that determines which records qualify as top N works just like with rank X, but instead of the return values being displayed in the pivot table, they are typically aggregated as part of a measure. A classic example of top N's use might be to compare all profits, say for a given region, versus profits of the top N products, say the top 5 products as we see in our example here. This kind of view can help identify how top-heavy our business is, so to speak. That is to say, how skewed our profits are towards our very best-selling products. So without further ado, let's look at how we can put this kind of view together in Excel. So first up, I'll create our pivot table with region on rows and profit on values. And now that we have our starter pivot table in place, I'll create a profit from top 5 products measure. Now just to start, this is not going to show the percentage of our profits coming from the top 5 products. We're just going to show, alongside our profit measure in the pivot table, the profit that we're getting just for our top 5 products. So I'll hit our Power Pivot tab and the Measures button so we can create that new measure. And again, I'll call it Profit from Top 5 Products. So now for our formula, we're actually going to start with a calculate formula, unlike with rank X where we didn't need calculate and we just used the rank X function. That's because top N works by extracting the top N records from a table, which then serves as a filter on whatever measure we pass into the calculate function. So if our goal here is to filter our profit measure by just our top 5 products, we'll do a calculate on profit, and then our top N function will serve as the filter. So let's go ahead and type that out. So we'll start with our calculate function, and then our measure will just be profit. And then our filter will be our top N function. Now the first argument of this function is pretty straightforward. It's just, what do we want N to be? Do we want top 5, top 10, or what have you? So we'll choose 5. And now the second argument, which calls for a table, should basically be whatever table contains the field we're trying to pull the top N of. So if we're trying to filter for the top 5 products, then we should specify the products table, because that's the table that contains the product name field. So we'll go ahead and enter that. And now our last argument for top N works just like the second argument for the rank X function we covered in the last video. Basically, it's a measure or expression that determines which products are in fact ranked higher or lower. And in our case, that's profit, since we're ranking our products by profit. So we'll enter that. And then we'll close our parenthesis for the top N function, and then again for the calculate function. And then let's check our formula to make sure we didn't miss anything. And it looks good. So now we'll format our measure as currency, and then click OK. And now we'll drag our new measure into our pivot. And as you would expect, in every case the numbers are lower than our overall profit numbers, but in some cases they're quite close, because each of these numbers represents, for the given region of that row in the pivot table, the profit from the top 5 products, the 5 products with the highest profit for that particular region. So just using our first region as an example, the East North Central region, we see that the profit from just our top 5 products was almost as much as our overall profit. So in that region in particular, our sales are pretty top heavy. And it's actually this kind of insight that the TOPN function is most effective at providing. And a more direct way of providing that insight is to, instead of showing a raw sum, a raw total of the profit from the top 5 products, to instead show the percentage of our overall profit that's coming from the top 5 products. Now, back in the Stone Age, several videos ago, we'd probably create a brand new measure that uses this measure as the basis for that calculation. But now that we know about variables, we don't have to create intermediate measures anymore. Instead, I can actually modify this measure to do exactly that without creating a new one. So to do that, I'll go back into my measures, and then I'll edit my profit from top 5 products, and I'll rename it percent profit from top 5 products. And since my overall goal is just to divide this number by the overall profit, I'll first declare a variable, which will just be the output of the formula that's currently generating this measure, and I'll just call it top 5 profit. And since we're using a variable, you know we have to use the return keyword. And now our expression is simply going to divide this top 5 profit by the overall profit. So we'll use the divide function, and then we'll reference our top 5 profit variable, and then our denominator will just be the profit measure, and then of course we'll include blank as our alternate result, and then we'll check our formula. Looks good so far. And now, because we're returning a percentage and not a dollar amount, we'll format our measure as a number and then a percent. And now I think we're ready to click OK. And there we are. Instead of just a raw number that forces us to compare the two numbers in our head to arrive at an approximate percentage of our profit coming from those top 5 products, we get what we really care about, which is just the percentage. And we were able to accomplish this cleanly and elegantly without resorting to an intermediate measure using variables. Now, one thing I want to point out before we move on, it typically doesn't make sense when using the TOPN function to include the field that you're taking the TOPN from in your pivot table. Now, this is one of those cases where the proverbial picture is worth 1,000 words, so instead of explaining it, I'm just going to remove region from our pivot and then swap in products. So the problem here is, because we have product on rows in our pivot table, that is now applying a filter to our measure. So even though our measure is trying to grab the top 5 products based on profit, and then sum those profits so it can ultimately find the percentage of our overall profit measure, because the pivot table is now passing a product filter in, we're really just taking the top 5 products where the product is that individual product in a given row of our pivot table. So for the very first row, our TOPN function is taking the top 5 products based on profit where the product is balsa board. And obviously that's just going to be one product. So the bottom line is, whatever it is that you're taking a TOPN of, you probably don't want that field to be in the same pivot table as your measure. Now this is kind of a low note to end the video on, so let's restore our pivot table back to its previous pristine state. So I'll remove product and then swap regions back in. Much better. Okay, so up to this point in the course, we've learned a lot about producing meaningful metrics from our data, but very little about how to present those metrics in a visually appealing way. But in the real world, the ability to create effective visualizations from our data is key to making sure the insights we generate are well understood by our audience. So in the next section, we're going to explore a series of techniques for adding visualizations to our Power Pivot tables to help us better communicate the story our data is trying to tell. I'll see you then.